David Garrett.
Mr Chairman, I'm very glad to see that Grant Robertson is with us. I thought that there were a couple of good contributions from that side. One was from Mr Robertson, one was from Mr Hipkins, and I'd like to address Mr Hipkins made a fairly passionate contribution saying that several times actually it doesn't work. But Mr Robertson was honest enough to admit that crime has in fact dropped dramatically in California since '94, and he also observed quite correctly that the greatest decline in the US has been in New York. He also observed correctly that New York is not... Just stifle yourself for a sec, Mr Hipkins. Mr Robertson also observed correctly that New York is not a three-strike state. But what he didn't say, and perhaps he doesn't know, I'll assume that may be the case, is that New York has adopted what is known as zero-tolerance policing, aka broken windows, but also they have done a twofold approach, what is called the front-end zero-tolerance policing and sentence enhancement. Three strikes is an example of a sentence-enhancing act. New York State also has sentence enhancement, but it's different from three strikes. Please do the research, Mr Robertson, you'll find that's correct. It's a fairly complicated system, but in simple terms, the first time... No, I'm sure he can. The first time the person gets a sentence, the second time, if I've got it correct, the tariff, as it's called in the trade, is doubled. The third time tripled. I'm pretty sure that's how it works roughly. So it's no surprise really that New York has seen the greatest drop in crime across the US because they've attacked the problem from both ends. And what that has resulted in is New York City turning in 15 years from one of the most dangerous cities in the US as measured by homicides and attacks to one of the safest. But, Mr Chairman, it's also no coincidence that of the three states in the United States that have had the greatest reductions in crime, New York is the top, closely followed by California, closely followed by Georgia. Georgia and California are the two of the 26 US states that have three strikes laws who use them the most. So I'm going to try and put this case to Mr Hipkins, and I hope he'll give it a fair hearing. I'm not afraid to say I don't know for sure that this will have the dramatic effect that I believe it's had in California, because I'm not God, I don't have a crystal ball. But let's look at it like this. Mr Robertson has been gracious enough to admit that there has in fact been a massive drop in crime in that state. Now this is interesting because the Reverend Givens, who Ms Dalzell was trying to recall his name, the Reverend Givens is on record as saying, quote, "We have seen no reduction in any category of crime whatsoever," close quote. Now, if Mr Givens, Reverend Givens, is correctly quoted on TV3, Mr Chairman, I'm sorry, there's only one conclusion, and that is that he is lying. Because as Mr Robertson says, it is a simple fact that the reduction has occurred. So how has this occurred, Mr Chairman? Why has there been this great reduction if it is not?
Point of order.
Mr Chair, I refer you to a ruling the Speaker made this afternoon in respect of a minister who made a similar accusation but in less colourful language against an individual where he used the words, I think, manufacturing something, and the Speaker ruled that out of order, and I think I took two occasions to get the minister to reword his reply. You've had before you now an accusation of an individual outside this place who was accused of lying. And I'd invite you perhaps to consider the Speaker's ruling because he ruled this afternoon.
Yeah, my understanding would be this, and the member does raise an interesting point, but what is permissible in a question upon which a minister has to answer or respond to is entirely different from what can occur in a debate. That would be my interpretation. Yes, the member is correct. The Speaker did say that. But this would not be the first time in... certainly in the committee stage of the House, that the kind of accusation that has just been levelled has been made. And I'm trying to recall any time in the past that it has been pulled up in that context. So it's a debating point. It's a rather robust one, and the member ought to be quite conscious of the fact of what he's saying, and he will be held account to it outside this House. And that's kind of the rule around that. So thank you for... Well, I've finished that point of order. Does the member have another one?
Yes, I do.
Right.
In that I would argue, sir, and we will move on, I'm sure, but I would argue if you reflect on what Speaker Smith said this afternoon, he was not confining his ruling to question time. He was making a more general ruling about a Member of Parliament who makes an accusation, and that one today, sir, this afternoon was relatively mild compared to what we've heard just now, and he was very clear that he felt that was grossly unparliamentary, and he required the member to readjust his tone and what he was saying. And I don't recall, but I'm happy to be corrected, that I don't recall the Speaker's remarks being confined to a minister in question time. I don't even think he alluded to that.
Yeah, well, I'm going to finish it with this point, but the Speaker at the time was referring to questions and supplementary questions that were being made. This is a debate, and any member who speaks here can be held account by the media and the public for what they actually say. And there is a difference in the state of the arena for what is occurring now to question time, and the member ought to be conscious of his responsibility. David Garrett.
So Mr Robertson has rightly acknowledged that the reduction has occurred. So why did that happen? Well, there's been a variety of explanations for the precipitate drop in crime, Mr Chairman. One of the most common, of course, is unemployment. Just before I move off the point, Ms Dalzell, I think it was, said that crime was already dropping prior to 1994. In fact, that's not correct. And again, it's simply a matter of fact that if you look at the stats from California, violent crime actually peaked in 1993, which will become relevant in a second. One of the explanations, or the most common, of course, for the drop is unemployment and economic conditions. And, Mr Chairman, that is clearly not so, and I'll say why. Obviously, there have been fluctuations in California's economy since 1994, as there has been all over the world. But the track has been consistently down all the time since 1994. The most recent data on unemployment in that state, the last quarter of 2009, unemployment was 16%, 16%, twice as high, or more than twice as high as it ever got here. Violent crime is still tracking down. So much for that argument. One of the more colourful arguments, Mr Chairman, has been the free availability of abortions after 1973. And when you think about it, at first it has some kind of logic. The logic is something like the poor people who are more likely to be criminal and produce criminals could, after 1973, have abortions. No, it's argued by the left a lot. And when you first hear it, you think, well, that makes some kind of weird sense. But then it's got a major hole in it, Mr Chairman, and it's this. As anyone over there with any knowledge of criminology would be aware, the prime crime-committing years are late teens to late 20s. So if that theory was correct, we should have seen a massive plummet in crime about 20 years after 1973. Instead, as I've said, crime peaked in the state of California in 1993. So not only was there no decline, the exact opposite of what that theory predicts happened. So you need to, we'll switch away from law because it's unfair to Mr Cosgrove, he doesn't have a law degree, and we'll talk the law of the language of psychology, Mr Chairman. And what psychologists say is this: you change something in an experiment and they call that the independent variable, and then the thing you measure is the dependent variable, and that way you find out whether the independent variable, whether it be electric shocks or rewards of food, change behaviour. Now, the only independent variable that I am aware of, Mr Chairman...
Yeah, I'm going to give the call to Mr Gatt, but I would just remind him we're on part two and he should focus...
I've almost finished, Mr Chairman. No, that's fine. The only independent variable that I'm aware of that altered, not just in California, but right across the US in the early 90s, was a U-turn and a focus on zero-tolerance policing and or sentence enhancement. So until someone comes up with a better theory than unemployment or ready availability of abortions, or perhaps the phases of the sun, until someone